Yeah. Kill Bill and Rev. We don't suck.
Why, God? Why are we here? Why must we suffer? Episode 42. The We Don't Suck podcast. Suck my dick.
What does the number 42 mean to you, Bill?
The number 42. I actually do have a story about the number 42.
Okay.
Gather round the campfire.
Okay. I mean, I've got no other choice, I suppose.
Come on now. Gather up now.
This better be super exciting.
Get a dog, little longy. We're in this bitch. It's story time. Come on, sit on Santa's lap.
Merry Christmas.
Okay, it's time. So I don't know if you remember this, but there was a rap group that I was producing for, like way back in the day.
Sum 42.
Yes, Sum 42. No, it was this group named 57, which is named after Exit 57 here in Walterboro, South Carolina, because that is the exit of Walterboro, and the whole joke was they're trying to get out of Walterboro, right?
Right.
At the time, it was it was a bunch of dudes, but it was only 2 dudes left, and so I was just like recording for them and like mixing for them and doing some like beats for them and collabing with them a lot. But
That's right, I remember.
I wasn't like in 57, but I was just like super affiliated with those guys, right? Well, there was another rap group that showed up like shortly after, and it was called 42.
Uh-huh.
It was named after the other exit out of Walterboro.
Really?
Yeah. And they had beef with 57.
That's great.
This is before I was in the picture, though. But it's just funny that like 57 existed.
Yeah, that is funny.
They literally took their whole shit.
You think they'd unite in their efforts to leave the town?
No, they were very much, well, I mean, the dudes at 57 were pretty cool. It just seemed like 42, they wanted that good rap beef, and they got it because one of the leader of 57 dissed 42, and the whole thing was they did a remix of 99 Problems by Jay-Z, and they say I got 99 problems, but 42 ain't one. But if you take 99 and like subtract 42 from it, it's 57. And I don't know why that was like such an ace in the hole, because it's really not that crazy. But at the time, I was like, damn, that shit's crazy. That 99
That's math.
minus 42 equals 57, and 57 is the end.
I like to imagine you just like bulging eyes, sweating like crazy once they get out of the booth.
Bulging cock.
You're shaking and sweating. You're like, oh my God, it's basic math.
Yeah.
I feel that though, like, I remember 57. Shouts out to them.
Yeah.
I know that at least one of the two still raps, right?
Yeah. Darius still raps. And
Shout out to Darius. Speaking of beef, Bill, what is your stance on beef these days? Like, when we were growing up, beef during different points of our lives was something that was almost just like a part of someone's hip-hop career. Like, it was almost granted that if you were a rapper and you were famous or whatever, at some point you were going to beef with somebody, and it would have probably positively impacted both your careers. I remember, the XXL magazine, they had the beef special issue where they talked about who had beef with who. Then you remember, of course, the beef DVDs.
Yeah.
Beef Volume 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
I loved all of those.
We watched one of those in Cali, remember?
Yeah, we tried to rewatch Volume 3, and that was tough. I remember as a kid, I loved Volume 3. I thought it was so dope.
Yeah.
But yeah, beef was basically integral.
As you grow up, you realize how dumb a lot of the beef stuff was. Like the stuff, particularly the one that stood out for me was Lil Flip and T.I.'s beef. which when I was a kid, I was all like, man, fuck Lil Flip. T.I. is
T.I. is
real.
the king of the South. He killed them.
Yeah, he's the king of the South. But if you like watch that now, I'm just kind of like, like he was kind of tripping.
Yeah,
like what? Like,
yeah, what was wrong with Tip? Yeah, like why was he tripping? And Flip seemed like such a like down to earth guy.
yeah.
I don't know why I couldn't see that when I was younger. And also just like, that was the 50 Cent era, I would argue.
Yeah.
And during the 50 Cent era, beef was super important. 50 Cent was beefing with everyone. Everyone was beefing with everyone. Chingy and Nelly were beefing, like you had the weirdest shit. So
that is weird to think about.
And they're related somewhat. So yeah, it's all very interesting. But these days, my opinion, my view of beef has changed. But my question to you is, what would it take for you to engage in beef again, you would say?
I don't think I could like seriously engage in beef with anyone now. Unless, I mean, I could. What is beef to you? Because beef to me is different than like.
What's beef?
Like having like a Twitter interaction that's like salty or something like that. Like beef to me is like you're dedicating time to like record music based on tearing someone down.
What's the most recent, very popular instance of beef that's been displayed as of late? I think the most recent one that comes to mind for me, or at least the most obvious one, is Pusha and Drake, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of entertaining, but it's interesting because in the modern sort of day of the internet and everything, beef doesn't kind of have the same lifespan anymore. Before, you'd be beefing with someone for years.
Yeah.
Now someone drops a song, holy shit, that's crazy, for a week or two. And then we're all like, yeah, collectively we agree that we're over it. Moving on, right?
I just want to point out that I got blue balls from every beef Drake has ever been involved in as well. Because first he beefed with Meek. That was a very public one, which I think it was like a kind of... It was kind of an unfortunate one for Meek because I think Meek is like a pretty talented rapper.
Definitely.
He was going against the unstoppable force because like Meek battle rapped.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here thinking like I knew that he wasn't going to win the beef just because he was beefing with Drake. He was just like on another level of popularity and is like a cultural icon versus just like a dope rapper, Mm-hmm. But I was thinking that Meek was going to come out swinging.
Right.
But it was just like he didn't. You remember that whole thing with like Flex? Like he was on Funk Flex saying like, then Funk Flex is sitting there like, we're going to drop his diss record. And it came out like 2 or 3 days later than he said it was going to and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just kind of underwhelming. And then like after all that was done, then I was like, okay, well now he's against Push. And Pusha T is like, he's the unmovable object in this one because he's like a seasoned veteran who is also like a cultural icon in rap music.
I don't think it's... I mean, the icon part of it is definitely plays into his hands, but I think Pusha came just more personal and more aggressive. For better or worse, he just like kind of went for the jugular.
Yeah. He was really like, I think the difference was like he wasn't, it didn't sound like to me that he was just trying to sell records, even though it was kind of apparent because like
it was definitely that, right?
Yeah,
but he was going, it seemed like, oh my God, this is actually somewhat real. What's kind of interesting with Drake is, it's the Drake era right now, right? Just
right.
We were talking about the 50 Cent era, this is the Drake era. But during the 50 Cent era, if you beef with 50 Cent, that could ruin your career. Right? It didn't happen to everyone, Dipset, for instance, although you could, make some arguments there. But yeah, he was kind of a force to be reckoned with. And if you're beefing with him, you're very likely to lose an audience, not gain one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at dudes like Ja Rule and like Fat Joe and like a lot of people that he beefed with that were like, for all intents and purposes, they were fine. Like I wasn't a really big Ja Rule fan. But like I like Fat Joe.
No, I wasn't either. But yeah, I liked Fat Joe too. I wasn't a huge Ja Rule fan either. But we can't deny that at one point he was like one of the biggest New York artists.
Yeah,
and he was.
But he spun him to be like this, like bitch made, like corporate puppet type, like R&B dude. You know what I'm saying? Because that's kind of what he was to an extent. You know what I'm saying? Like
to an extent, but then Murder Inc. also were sort of involved in activities that, I mean, history shows us there was violence involved and poor decisions made.
I'm not questioning Ja Rule or the people that he was around, like street credibility. Like, I think that they were like at least somewhat about it. You know, definitely Gotti was. You know, but I think
for sure.
I think that
and Ashanti even, I would say.
yeah, real shit. But no, 50 was so hot, and 50 just went so hard on people. He would do a whole mixtape making fun of somebody.
His albums would have diss songs on them, like the Get Rich or Die Trying. I think had Wanksta, right? Mm-hmm. And then.
Yep.
He had so many songs. Every record on that G Unit record, I think there was I Smell Pussy. I Smell Pussy. Is that you, Ja? I Smell Pussy.
Yeah, it was relentless.
And then even on his next big album, it was like, Ja use a window shopper. And he made very catchy, famous records with, you know, where he spent millions of dollars in the music video. Everyone around the world would sing along, not even fully understanding sometimes.
Yeah.
Because they weren't English, that these songs were dissing those guys.
And it's real hard too, like people who are outside the culture, like people who are outside of beef culture, they look at 50 Cent and they know who 50 Cent is, but they might not know who Ja Rule is. Like, I don't know, like I think the average, like maybe white person who wasn't a hip hop head would know all about 50 Cent just because he is who he is and he's as big as he is and he's surrounded by the people that he is, and they might not know as much about Ja Rule or Fat Joe or Jadakiss.
Yeah, because Fat Joe, Jadakiss, and especially Ja Rule, I would say they were very famous within New York and quite popular within America. However, 50 Cent transcended that. You know, he was internationally known. He was signed to the, you know, Dre. He was signed to Eminem. Eminem was the biggest artist at the time. He was basically MJ. And so his association with Eminem definitely helped boost his credibility, I think, internationally, especially with the white fans, you know?
Yeah.
And this was during a time where I think hip hop was becoming a very, very much an international sensation, but for a very limited range of artists. And so when 50 Cent was beefing with someone and this kind of information would surface, people would just assume he doesn't fuck with these guys. Fuck them. They suck. Blah, 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 right?
Yeah. No, yeah, real talk.
Whereas these days, during the Drake era, I'd say it's very different because now hip hop is, it's the fabric of modern day, like, you know, social media, the way we interact. It's integrated in our language now, right?
Yeah.
So it's very different to what it was before. Now I think if you beef with Drake, it's good for you. It's good for everyone. Like, if you're beefing with Drake, no one comes out of it really hurt, in my opinion. I don't think Meek. I think initially Meek wasn't faring so well, you know.
Yeah.
Like, is that your girls? Is that your tour or your girls' tour? Whatever was that? Was that your world tour or your girls' tour? I don't remember that shit like that. His association with Nicki and then him breaking up with her. But generally, I feel like it didn't really affect him badly, and he got more listeners than before just because Drake was bigger, and it benefited Pusha too.
Well, yeah. At the time, it felt like he was like ruining the man. Like, that's what it felt like, just because it was like trending. And like, I remember Meek was like kind of like a punchline for a minute. And then like he came out with a good record. Like, his last record is arguably one of his better records ever, you know? And like all rap heads just forgot about it. Like, they were just kind of like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, you know what I'm saying? And then everyone's listening to Meek again, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And Pusha, it was never a problem because nobody was like, wow, Pusha came so soft. Damn, if Drake destroyed him. Drake did well.
Well, that was the thing. That was the thing, though. I wanted to talk about this because I want to get your opinion on this. So if Drake were to have continued that beef, because it felt like he backed out of that because he knew that no matter what happened from that point on, it wouldn't be good for him. Because this is the first time I had ever seen Drake with his back against the ropes in that kind of way. Because like when he came out with the song that was like talking about like he was hiding his son and like all this other stuff, and then it was just like Drake didn't really clap back at him. Like, it makes me wonder if we could have had, I don't think it would have been the same type of beef that we used to have, but at least something that was like a longer feud than it was, instead of something that like seemed more like, okay, Push's people are telling him to come after this guy because they know that it'll get him to sell records. And because, like, do you think Pusha T really gives a fuck about someone having a ghostwriter or someone like hiding their son from the world?
No, I think he just wanted to, you know, go at him, and I'm sure there's some history there, but I don't know. I think Drake has a good team, and they probably advised him to stop, or maybe even himself, you know, kind of came to the conclusion, oh, okay, well, now I'm at a point where I could lose business. I think like his Adidas deal was on the line if that wasn't squandered around that time, and maybe at that point it was like, okay, well, this isn't, now it's not really benefiting me either anymore.
Yeah.
So maybe it was that. Also, maybe it was, you know, a lot of the times we don't see this, but OGs are very important, and especially when it comes to hip hop beef, and OGs are the people who sort of are behind the scenes, and they can help mend situations, fix situations, get two people together, rappers, and make them squash their beef. Also, OGs being involved in beef could escalate things very quickly. I suspect they had a mutual OG that stepped in and probably, you know, stopped it from going any further.
No, they said I don't remember who it was, but they said that there was a person that talked to both of them.
Oh, really?
I can't remember who it was. I remember somebody talking about it on Twitter, but there was definitely a person that was like, nah, don't do this. You know?
Okay, that makes sense then. Okay, yeah, because that's kind of a usual thing. It's more of a recent thing. In the past 10 years, OGs have been more like exercising that sort of experience and, I don't know, brain power.
Cerebral cortex energy.
To kind of go in there and use their powers to kind of stop something from escalating further. If they see that, okay, now it's going to be bad for you and this person or that person, or you're going to mistakenly drag this person in potentially. Basically, a voice of reason. That's what I look at them like. OGs are a voice of reason.
Yeah, the first time I ever saw that, like actively, which was during the era of beef, was Pimp C when he got home, when he got let out of jail, because he was, you know, in jail for a minute for like an assault charge or something, and he came back out, and then he put out this song, Knocking Doors Down, and it was like literally everyone in Houston that was beefing. Like he was talking about, he was like, I remember there was this like one thing where he's like, Slim Thug and Zero, y'all still bullshitting, y'all need to come together, how much money could we be getting? Like, and then he ended up like all of these people that he was like calling out, they ended up all going on tour together, which is real crazy to think about.
That's beautiful.
And that was the thing, man. That was like why I was like so like I'm still just like mad about Pimp C dying like over 10 years later.
I mean, there's so many reasons to be mad, you know. Be a pioneer, seemed like a fun and good person. From, you know, just hearing people's accounts.
You rapped about hairy assholes.
Yeah, and so there's plenty of reasons for sure to mourn his passing. At this point, must have been over a decade now, right?
Yeah, he passed in 2007. I remember because I was recording one of my first songs when he passed, and then like I put a R.I.P. Pimp C in there.
Yeah,
like retroactively, like right after I was done, like I saw.
All right.
They had passed away. I saw it on like MySpace or some shit that he passed.
Damn.
Yeah, and that was the thing was because like everybody, it was free Pimp C for the longest time. He finally gets out of jail. He records like so much music. Like they're still releasing like posthumous music stuff, but he recorded because he wrote so much shit in jail. Came out and recorded like 10 albums worth of shit in like 2 weeks. Something crazy. And then like a month later he died.
Yeah, that sucks. R.I.P. Pimp C.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Yeah, he was a very, very talented rapper.
But I'm trying to think now outside of like beefs that, you know, let's forget about Drake and these massive beefs. What I think doesn't make sense to me is, and now that I look at it retroactively, as well. I don't think beef on small scale, like on a small scale, is a smart thing.
No.
Like when it comes to music, right? Because I don't think it benefits anyone. If no one's really ever heard of you, by which I mean, let's say you have 1,000 followers, right? And every other song maybe gets 1,000 plays. Basically, no one's ever heard of you. That's the way I look at it. So if you're beefing with someone who has around the same amount of viewers or the same audience, then you're not really benefiting yourself. Your audience probably doesn't care for it because they don't know who you're beefing with, and your new people coming in listening to your music don't know who you're talking about or why you have these issues, or so it's kind of that's a bizarre thing, and I wonder if it exists. I'm saying I wonder if it exists because I haven't been exposed to any obvious examples of this, but I assume it does exist, and I wonder if it benefits anyone other than like really successful artists, or let's say people beefing with very successful artists because of their history together, right? I don't see beef being like a force for good, just on in terms of business, right? Because we're talking about beef here. We're not talking about street beef. We're talking about beef on wax.
Yeah, like actual people recording diss tracks, having a public feud with someone. Well, okay, I think that one of the reasons why beef died is because the way rap music is released, consumed, and how rappers are seen on the internet now versus before, when there was no internet activity, and if it was like a MySpace page or something like that. I think now with this like kind of, I wouldn't say pressure, but just like how the world is and how everyone kind of needs, if you're an artist, you kind of need a online persona at some point, like some sort of, for the most part, most people talk on the internet the same way. Like it's kind of like they have a Twitter account, they have an Instagram, they have something where they can put music out, and it's like, here, this is a look into my real life or whatever I have going on. Whereas before, they didn't have that. There was no like direct window that was like controlled by the artist holding their cell phone. Because of that, there would be like someone would put out a record and that was them talking about it, or them being on an interview was them talking about it. And it wasn't like a real life, like I'm talking to someone. It's like I'm talking and sending a message to someone. Then they'll hear it and they'll get all fired up and angry, and then they'll do the same thing, and they'll go back and forth for months at a time, you know, sometimes years. And nowadays, if there's two rappers beefing, which you see it a lot of time. I see it a lot of time in like SoundCloud rappers or something like that. Like it'll be like someone says something that like the other person doesn't agree with. They'll get like real fired up about it. And then it becomes such a spectacle online that all the like fans start going like, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, constantly for like a day or two.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good example. Bones and Suicide Boys beefed for like a day.
Right.
And the whole reason was Bones had a line where he says like, I don't pop Xans because pills are for pussies. I'm not afraid of feeling feelings. Right. And then Scrim, who was like an opiate, addict, a recovering opiate addict, he came out and was like fired up at a show and said, that's fucking dumb. Like, I have to take Suboxone like to live, like so I don't like die basically, or have like the worst sickness ever, you know what I'm saying? And was just saying like people deal with their problems in different ways, and it's not healthy to talk like that, but then like, because like everybody in that circle, like they both listen to both of those artists most of the time. Like if you listen to Bones, you probably listen to Suicide Boys, or have listened to them at some point. Everybody is like, nah, y'all should be friends online. And then the next day the beef is over, like it's not even a beef. It's like a skirmish. Like it just seems to be like a lot of tiny skirmishes.
It doesn't even feel like a beef at that point. And it's like, I feel like beef on a very small level, maybe if you're just coming up, it could be a good exercise for you to like have a target, and maybe gives you something to rap about when you're going through a writer's block of some sort. But otherwise, it's just not entertaining. As someone from the outside looking in, I would not be entertained. Honestly, I wasn't even that entertained by the Pusha T and Drake thing. I didn't really care for it.
No. Well, that seemed like a half step too. That's the thing is like I was entertained by the spectacle of it. And then I was expecting Drake to not fall back on it. Like I thought he was going to go forward and step up to the challenge. And it seems like he just kind of sidestepped it entirely.
Right.
I think the reason why that's disappointing, and like I said earlier, like gives me blue balls, is because I grew up on someone disses you, you diss them back. And that's just how it works. And a lot of these kids now, they didn't have that. Like no one had that, and they've never seen that interaction. And so they're seeing this right here and they're like, wow, this is crazy. And I'm like sitting here like it's like literally like someone saying something mean about the other person and the other person being like, oh, okay, whatever, and just moving on, you know? I don't think it wasn't satisfying in that way. And it wasn't even satisfying in the same way from the beginning.
No, I didn't find it satisfying at all.
Because it didn't seem to be like a personal motive.
I kind of prefer the jabs. Like if you're making music and you're talking about something and you have like some jabs you throw in there and they might not even be that obvious, you know? I like Jay-Z's style of maybe he's alluding to this person, maybe he's alluding to that person. He threw it in there. It sounds dope. We think we know who he's talking about. But it's not about that person necessarily. The song's not about that person. It just kind of comes across that way. Even like Aesop Rock, you know? I know that you and I have spoken about this. I suspect that and a lot of people probably disagree with me, but I suspect on Impossible Kids, I think was it Dorks, I think? Dork?
Yeah, Dorks. Dorks. That was my first thought too, what you're about to say.
Yeah, I thought he was talking about LP, you know? I thought he was dissing LP, or at least not dissing necessarily, but addressing something or throwing his view out there into the world. And just certain things that he said kind of lined up. Same goes with on Skeleton, Zero Dark 30. There were certain things that were said that alluded to Dev Jux, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel like those two songs connect. I feel like Dorks is
like a conclusion almost.
Yeah, it's a conclusion. Yeah, Zero Dark 30 felt like, okay, new beginning. And Dorks just seems kind of like, you know, looking over your shoulder again and like, how do you feel now about it, right? I kind of like how he addressed it because it feels more, it's almost more about Aesop. Yeah. Than whoever he's talking about. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's his perspective and his situation.
Well, I was going to say that it feels to me less like a diss, even though it might be critical of L or of what happened, but more like he's like working through it as if it was like a personal therapy session and he's talking to himself about it. That's what it feels like to me. Like it's more like
exactly.
There are unresolved issues. It's clear anyone who followed that whole situation, just the way Def Jux went down and then everybody just kind of stopped talking to L, or like a lot of people like just stopped interacting with L entirely. Like there was clearly some kind of, whether it be monetarily, whether it be personal, whether it be a little bit of both, something went down that seemed like everybody was just kind of like separating, not publicly beefing or anything, but something happened that made a lot of people not interact anymore.
But then if you really look at it, a similar thing with Aesop, you would argue, right? Like he hasn't worked with anyone from Def Jux since. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone. Whereas LP and Cage, I think, neither has Cage probably. Cage was probably the wildest out of everyone,
They've
right?
interacted on Twitter and shit though.
Well, Cage and Aesop interacted early on because they started a duo together. I think it was two of each animal, and they were going to work on a record together. That was the name of their duo.
Yeah. I was talking about L and Cage, though. L and Cage have interacted.
Yeah. And L and Cage is, you know what? Maybe Cage is still the best connected with everyone. That being said, Cage has not interacted with Ace in forever. I'd be curious to see if they still follow each other on Twitter these days. But
the last interaction that I saw with L and Cage was L was talking about politics and Cage said something that was like not like disagreeing, but just kind of contrarian, like to whatever he was saying. And then he said something like, "Oh, you need your own political podcast," or something like that. And the thing that's funny about that is because like L is like a pretty leftist kind of guy from what I understand, whereas
Cage is a little bit more on the conservative side.
Yeah, the conservative side of things. It was interesting, like very certainly an interesting, because I know that like I know for a fact that if they got in a room and talked about politics, it would not be pretty.
Probably not. And LP would probably, I feel like LP would probably try to end the conversation sooner than later. You know, he probably wouldn't want to engage in it too much. I know that Ace is also very left wing in terms of his ideals. So I'm guessing maybe that's part of the reason him and Cage aren't as close anymore. I don't know. We don't know what the deal is behind the scenes, right? And I absolutely respect that that's their private relationships, their private lives or whatever. And I guess that's why actually, pretty much what you said. Like when Ace is talking about these subject matters, it feels like it's his own experience. We're seeing his concerns and his thoughts through his mind. Whereas with a lot of other rap beef, it seems so fueled by ego. Mm-hmm. And I mean, because we are within the sphere of hip hop, ego is kind of our fuel. It's understandable that a lot of beef is just about ego.
Yeah.
And I'm sure even the beef that I like, as I said, with Ace and L, that I suspect that there might be sort of somewhat maybe bad blood potentially. I feel like even in those instances that there's probably an element of ego somewhere in there, you know?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I think the thing is that I think people look at people like L or Ace because they're so personal that they're almost free of ego. And I think that that's probably not the case at all. I think that even someone as... I don't know, as zen as Ace. Mm-hmm. Like it seems as though the ego is so far removed, but I think it's impossible. I don't think it's possible to be a rapper and not have ego.
Yeah,
especially coming from the era that they did. They've grown up, but I mean, like this, it's impossible. Like there's no way you don't.
Yeah,
it's just a big part of getting up there and talking about yourself for like 15 songs. You have to have something going on in your head that makes you do that.
Yeah. Not
to someone's detriment, I don't think. I just think it's a part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's definitely, not to get on some hip hop conspiracy theory shit, but there was definitely, especially on Skeleton, because even if you look at the album art, on the back of the vinyl, I'm pretty sure, there are crows and they all have red trucker hats. Like L used to wear. And I think that was kind of funny, you know? So it's definitely, dude, there's no way that he wasn't talking about that whole situation on Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, Zero Dark 30 definitely felt like, I mean, that hook, to me, was the synopsis of the demise of Def Jux from Ace's perspective, right? And then going back to Dorks off of Impossible Kid, on verse 2, Ace says, "I used to hang around with rappers at the root of the scene. It meant a lot to feel the fugitive community breathe. Maybe to sentimentalize us, to be truly naive. I know some shit about your heroes that you wouldn't believe. I think we're all a bunch of weirdos on a quest to belong. The songs are echolocation up in impregnable fog. That's why it's odd to see a pile of imperfections and flaws ascend a pedestal to patronize the rest of the cogs." Now, at first I was like, okay, interesting. Like, who within his circle ascended the pedestal, right? And I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the first person that came to mind was LP, but I didn't want to draw any conclusions. And then he follows it up with, in a mess of obnoxious fantasy, posturing and pageantry. I ain't even mad. I'm impressed. Shit is baffling. God Almighty, chopping ivory tower to piano keys. Play your own dirge on the way to surfing Maggot Beach. I'm like, okay, so... still arguable here. You fucking dorks ain't a source of the art. You can't be cooler than the corners where you source all your parts. The poker face, all it takes is a couple sordid remarks. We let the manicure out. We make the sorcery bark. And I don't know. It's just like there's so many pieces there that, I would like to think I was a late Def Jux nerd. And I read a lot of interviews and trying to find any instances where L was mentioning Ace after 2007, and Ace mentioning L, and just kind of first of all, there's clearly something there. Again, I don't want to be intruding. I'm just speaking from a nerd perspective, right? From the outside looking in, as rappers that I really look up to. Something must have been there because they just stopped communicating outright, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you're a Def Jux nerd too. When you hear that verse that I just read, doesn't it just like, what other person comes to mind other than a L?
Oh, it has to be, especially like him talking about the piano keys.
The piano keys, yeah. Play your own dirge on the way to surfing Maggot Beach.
And the whole thing of like, you can't be cooler than the source of your parts, which by the way is a crazy line. Like that shit, every time I hear that shit, I'm always like, whew. Like, because that's the thing that's crazy about that, right? I don't even feel like that's a diss track. It's a diss track. It is kind of, but it's like, that is so much more like personal than any diss track I've ever heard. Like,
right, yeah.
It's like, because it's not just talking about like what they said on a record or what they want to be perceived as or anything like that. This is like a very personal viewpoint of someone who is very close to this other person, two people that I consider to be my idols in this rap shit, you know? And I think like, it's just very interesting to see that perspective painted out in possibly the most straightforward way we're ever going to get from Ace. Because if there's one thing that we know, especially older Ace records, straightforward is not necessarily he's a very subtle writer. You know, it doesn't seem like
I think a lot of it is just very, very referential. And I think specifically referential to his personal life. So I'm sure just a lot of the parts of what I read out a moment ago were references that maybe you and I will never come to understand because they came from personal interactions. Maybe someone like Cage would more understand this, or even someone closer to the two of them. And it's funny because, you know, the hook is like, party over here, I'll be over there. But for that, after that verse, he specifically says, life is so unfair. Party over here, I'll be over there.
Yeah.
And when he said life is so unfair, I was just like, God damn.
Yeah, dude.
I was just thinking, like, who's bigger than Ace? No one's bigger than Ace besides, like, the only thing that came out of Def Jux that's bigger than Ace is LP being part of Run the Jewels.
Yeah.
You know? So that's kind of where I'm coming from with my assumptions.
Yeah. I agree that it's, I don't think that that's off base at all. I don't think that we're pulling at straws, trying to find, something that's not there. It seems as though there's something definitely there.
I mean, some people I'm sure will argue that it might be about critics. You know, it might be it might be about new people coming within hip hop that are very ego driven. It could be about many different things. But at least to me and to you, this seems like Ace is getting something off his chest, potentially pertaining to LP.
I think that that's pretty accurate. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Is that, you could, because his music is so esoteric, but I think that, and you can pull whatever you want from it. And that's what he'll say if someone were to ask him that. Like, if anyone were to ask him, like, oh, what was I talking about? He'd be like, oh, you know, you can pull whatever. But I think that he definitely had, because that whole record, Impossible Kid, seemed to be his most straightforward record to me. That's one of my favorite records from him. Yeah. But it's definitely like the most palatable.
That and Skeleton, and they're both.
Yeah, Skeleton's really good too. But Impossible Kid particularly, I feel like, is just kind of like, a lot of it can be taken at face value, or that you can, not face value, I don't know how to describe it. It seems like the easiest to crack out of all of them, like in terms of like what he's talking about, and most of the songs, it seems to be a little bit more like upfront.
I wonder how true that is. I wonder, maybe it is partially true in that regard, but I also wonder it's just because maybe the vocabulary is more familiar to like the average listener, perhaps, but I still think it's sort of guarded and like very personal references. I don't know. I think you probably relate to this, but I know in a lot of my music, I use very personal references and I use very specific imagery to help safeguard it a bit, almost, you know?
Yeah.
If I was saying things like, I say everything I mean to say, but if I were to really take it apart and say exactly what everything means, I'd probably lose a lot of my close relationships, friends, you know. because it is a lot of it is incredibly personal to the point where I'm worried that if somebody close to me cracks it, they would get perhaps not the best. No, they would get a better view of who I am and how I think, but maybe they wouldn't like that necessarily.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why Dorks resonates with me in the sense that I do that a lot. I don't beef with people, but throughout the last 6 years, there have been at least a handful of songs where I have mentioned things about people that perhaps I'm close with, or perhaps rappers within a similar community or corner of the underground internet hip-hop sphere, where I've referred to these people without specifically saying names, because it's not really so much about them, it's about myself. And oftentimes the things that I pick apart in others are the things that I hate about myself. And so I kind of use another person and hyperbole to help pick apart maybe an insecurity or a flaw I see within myself. Like there was, I've had multiple songs where, one song where I said, these numbers won't feed your ego forever, right?
Yeah.
To different people, it means different things. To me at the time and to this day, it meant, like how many likes you get, retweets you like, how many plays, how many subscribers, SoundCloud followers, monthly Spotify listeners. Those numbers are never going to make you happy. And I was saying that because I remember there was a time where everybody was posting how many SoundCloud listens they got, their totals, or like, wow, the song hit 10K in just a couple of days. And I remember just like, I didn't like that kind of people focusing on something like that. And I think the reason I didn't like it so much is because I knew that partially I was sometimes plagued with these same thoughts, where the numbers were enforcing an understanding of who I was or what my worth was. And so seeing others partake in it made me feel like I got to see what it looks like from the outside looking in. I mean, I said what I said, and I meant what I said. But just to clarify, when people hear this out, I think it's absolutely fine to celebrate milestones. If you're hitting numbers that make you happy and you want to share that with everyone and tell everyone that, hey, I got this, I'm so thankful, or whatever, that's absolutely fine. And honestly, you can do whatever you like when it comes to saying what you want online, right? But I mean no disrespect. I definitely don't mean any disrespect with that. Again, I just wanted to stress that it's more so a critique, I think, of myself. I wish I cared less about numbers. And I like to think I do care less now, but to an extent, I still sometimes look at things, how they perform, and think to myself, that didn't resonate with people so much, or
Yeah. Well, that's a thing that I think is not a healthy. I think there's a healthy way to look at things, and there's like not a healthy way to look at things when it comes to like stats. And I think that when you start trying to cater, or for me, there was definitely a point where like I would see numbers, and I would see, especially like when I was first starting to get a little bit, and I would see it and I'd be like, okay, well, this worked, this didn't, and so I should make more music like this. And I don't think that's like healthy.
Definitely not.
Because you should really be making music for yourself. Because I also think that it was like detrimental to an extent. Not necessarily like, because I don't know, like it seems like people have been pretty positive about most of the stuff I've put out. But like, I don't ever hear anyone be like, wow, that guy's fucking whack, or this song was fucking whack a lot, But there's stuff that like I've done on records that like I look back on and I'm just kind of like, I really wish I just went with my gut instead of like trying to like do something to impress someone or something like that. And I think like a lot of times that was fueled by craving validation in some kind of way, because like, I mean, I think it all comes down to this when it comes to like people who are like obsessed with their stats and stuff. Like for me, I don't think I was ever like obsessed with my stats, but like I always would say like, I wanted, now I don't care, but at one point I was so hungry to be like, I'm a rapper. I want to do this full time, and I want like people to be proud of me and look at me and be like, wow, like he's doing some shit, you know? And like people in my hometown, people online, I wanted to see people who like hated on me like years ago to be like, wow, you really did it, you know? And I think that was like a big motivator for like watching those numbers. Now I'm like looking at them from a perspective of like, okay, like we have a business and I'm trying to make sure everything's running smoothly without compromising myself. But I do think there's like a healthy and an unhealthy way about going to look at it. And I also think that there's a bunch of pockets on the internet in communities that aren't necessarily ours, but are like closely linked to ours, that people compete for plays really hard and they want to outdo everyone and they become really cliquey. And everybody's like, well, this guy ain't got this, so I don't want to fuck with him. And like me personally, I don't care about that. Like if someone's dope,
yeah,
I fuck with them. You know what I'm saying? Like if I like the music, I'm not going to like not work with somebody just because like they're not popping. Like what the fuck? Like what is that? You know?
Right.
I don't think that's good.
No, exactly. And I you know, the numbers should not like inform you how much worth you should place into things, where whether it be yourself or someone else's music. As I said earlier, it can be absolutely healthy to celebrate milestones, but to make decisions based off those numbers, definitely not healthy. I never did, so I never fell into that trap. I never did anything with the intention of like pulling in numbers, coming from a place of music, right? You know me, if anything, I kind of, it's weird. Like I have a very strange relationship with it. I'll let it bother me. So that's where it's unhealthy. I'll let it bother me because on the one hand, I tell myself I don't care what anyone else thinks because I think I know best for what makes me happy, right? And I don't make music with like, oh man, people are gonna like this if I do that, right? And if I do this,
The hood gonna love this one.
yeah. So I've never approached music from that perspective. And sometimes I'm almost like, it's almost like I don't care if they like it or not. But then if the numbers are like, I don't know, let's say for whatever reason, they're just uncharacteristically lower than the rest of the stuff, then it starts to fuel my insecurities, because then I'm starting to feel like a real imposter. Like, oh, I was delusional. You know, I must be delusional because people, like, I'm saying I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but if I'm enjoying everything, and then as people on the outside are like, yeah, but he's like super whack, then I'm enjoying myself in a like this bubble of delusion.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, imposter syndrome kicks in. But now, like for instance, as I'm speaking retroactively, it's just saying it makes it sound ridiculous to me, because that's not where, on a calm, cool head, that's not where I place my value at all, and it doesn't matter. But when you're in the thick of it and it's happening to you, sometimes you don't think so rationally. And so that's where the numbers can become dangerous, and ego-driven pursuits can become dangerous. And so when I see others do it and I diss them in a song, in a sidebar, a lot of it is because it's a personal like connection for me, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a healthy way to get that out too, though, is to, especially if it's I don't know. I make up people a lot when I diss people. Mm-hmm. I make up people, or that'll be like a personification of like a lot of actions that I see on the internet, because like, I don't know, it's a lot of shit I see, the way people treat each other, the way people, not just in music, but a lot of times in music. I mean, in the communities that we're in, you'll see people say some sideways shit about somebody and it becomes like this whole big fucking thing, and it's just like everyone's so caught up in some man, lo-fi producers are the worst with that shit, man. I see that all the time. You'll be on there and it'll be like lo-fi producers will be going at each other, and I'm like sitting here like, why? What? We all do the same shit. Like, why? You know, like what makes anyone better than anyone else just because you got a friend who does this or whatever? I don't know. I think a lot of those kids are real young and they're doing the same shit that I did when I was young. But just like speaking as someone who like went through like the courses of like beefing with people like in your area or online or whatever, and like realizing that it was just like fruitless, like a completely fruitless endeavor that like didn't make anyone happy.
Maybe as I said like earlier, maybe like during writer's block, and if you're really unknown, it's not going to negatively affect you, and it could be an interesting exercise. But if you're just screaming at each other online and it has nothing to do with actual, creative endeavors of sorts, then it is kind of fruitless and you are wasting your energy.
Yeah.
And you're going to regret it most likely.
I miss like beat battle culture, because that was like a really big thing that really like I think separated the boys from the men, like in the older communities and stuff. Like I remember being on SoundClick, everybody would beat battle. Even on Newgrounds, people would beat battle. Like, and I think beat battling is interesting because it's not like rapping. It's not personal. It's trying to figure out who's better, but in the process, they're making something specifically for this one thing, trying their best to outperform the other person. So it's like, I don't know.
It's also a very different facet, right? Like I feel like what you're mentioning is certain people would not like. I feel like some phenomenal producers would never indulge in that, just because it's just not their kind of thing. It's almost like a different thing altogether. Like beat battling or even rap battling, I consider rap battling and writing rap songs like two completely different worlds. One is more of arts sector, the other one is more in the entertainment sector, right? And I would say beat battling is closer to entertainment than it is to art, where like maybe you're making something as like a part of a vision and album, movie, whatever you want to call it, right? Not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying those are very two different worlds. Yeah. And it's just interesting how like one of those worlds has, in my opinion, kind of disappeared from the internet, surprisingly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, man. I'm not even talking about necessarily in a negative way, because we used to do these things on the SoundClick forums where it would be all these producers that were trying to sell beats to rappers. That was their main goal, was to sell beats to rappers, to get placements, to make money doing music production. And I remember they would do these tournaments, and they weren't, they were for money sometimes. Like you get like $100 prize to whoever won or whatever,
But it was more so for the sport.
And it was the sport. And for me, that was huge for me, because I was battling people who, I mean, at the time they were like big in the community. And like if I won, which I did, I won one, and I'd be like, and like I battled this dude Twan Beats. I think he's produced for some pretty big people now, but at the time he didn't, but everyone knew who he was in the forums. He was good. He's a really good producer. And I battled him, and it was like a really close vote, but I won by like 2 votes out of like the 10 or whatever, or 11. I think we had a tiebreaker vote in there too, like the 11th person. And I remember like people in the community like took me seriously because I beat Twan, and and he was cool. Like, what I'm saying? Like he would send me stuff all the time and be like, yo, what do you think about this? Like, it was never like negative at all. And I think that's interesting too, because especially that's the thing with like the lo-fi scene, is a lot of these people flip like very similar source material. Like when they sample and shit. I would love to hear stuff where it's like 2 really dope lo-fi producers get the same sample, and then like it forces them to be creative to outperform the other one, because I see a lot of lo-fi dudes.
Well, I think these days the equivalent would be something like not a beat battle, but like Team Supreme kind of deals,
Yeah, like a beat cipher.
A beat cipher. That I feel like that's a healthy equivalent, because no one's voting for someone to win. Again, it makes it a slightly less of a sport than beat battling, right, in that regard. But you're sort of competing. When you're making your own thing, you kind of want to make you kind of want to wow people when you're in a beat cipher, and you want to be like, I want to show people how interesting or unique my approach is going to be, or how I can flip the sample, or what I can do with this kit. And so I feel like that's kind of what it's evolved into, but I haven't seen much outside of that. And I wonder if it's going to kind of come back maybe a little bit more to the forefront eventually again or not. But that is more healthy. Beat battling and beat ciphers is way more healthy and more productive use of your time than just going on and on in your Twitter threads that nobody gives a fuck about. Even those like hundreds and thousands of likes you get, those people don't really give a fuck about it either, bro. And if they do, they won't 5 years from now. They're going to look back at it and regret wasting that time if they recall that time at all.
Well, it's not, none of it's about the music. That's the thing. It's like people will be on there arguing about, I don't know, like they'll be like, wow, you looped some shit. And I'm like sitting here just like who gives a fuck? Like, who cares? Or like, it'll be like, well, I'm tired of these producers who do this, or they sample this all the time and like all this stuff. And I'm just kind of like sitting there like, I mean, this it is what it is, and people are gonna argue and then say that so and so's trash, and it's gonna get a whole bunch of likes because like they have a big following and they don't really care about what's going on. They're just trying to show support to this person, you know. And maybe they care about just the fact that like people respond to conflict on the internet, and they'll go and they'll give their like little 2 cents, and then they don't really care about, you know, because everybody has to have an opinion on everything nowadays, I feel like. So they go on and give their little 2 cents, and then when it happens like for the 5th time, then they realize like, oh, this person's just being an asshole, and they might even unfollow them, you know. So I don't know. It's it's not good.
Again, like if it's something that you're doing or you're partaking in, then I guess what we're saying is probably going to go in one ear out the other. But I would it's just, again, it's advice, and it's something people go through. I know that I went through many instances in my life of beef online, or just screaming at someone back and forth online. and all of that was very much worthless. Absolutely worthless, and didn't amount to much. But I guess it was an important learning curve for me. So maybe that was the purpose of me going through all those things. And if you're about to go into into a dispute with someone on Twitter, maybe think twice before doing it. Like, what do you intend to get out of it by the end of it? Do you want this person to concede and admit that they're whack? Do you want them to feel some type of way, like struggle to sleep that night and thinking about that shit and about their insecurities? Do you want to convince someone that you are dope? And will that make you feel better at the end if like you had to scream at them to convince them? You see what I'm saying? It's just like I can't foresee much of a positive outcome. So just if you're in the business or whatever, I could say business, it doesn't mean you're making money off this, but if you're in the business of making art, you should be making art. And we're lucky that we have this podcast. We use it oftentimes as a platform to talk about it. But like us doing this is just banter. If it was this is not going to help me. This is not going to help Bill. Talking about this stuff usually just doesn't really help. Understanding it helps because it helps you avoid talking about it too much. But making stuff is the best thing you could be doing with your time, you know? Even if it's something like, you know, if you're a producer or a beat maker or instrumentalist, whatever you want to call yourself, then just make a lot of beats. Just keep producing, keep making stuff. And, you know, there'll be lots of garbage. Most of the shit you're probably going to make, you're not going to necessarily fuck with. But use your, you know, next time you see you're angry with someone or there's a disagreement or blah, 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 just like, move on to close that and go make music. Just go make music. And if you're a rapper and someone said something kind of insulting on Twitter to you, mute them and go write a verse. Get it out your system and continue making music. And not everything, with rap, we're fortunate enough, I think, like where we can put things into words and it can be, I don't know, a very relieving experience. I know that I do that sometimes. I've written a lot of almost diss records just for the sake of getting it out of my system, and I've never released them, and I will never will. I've never recorded them. Even when I wrote them, I never intended to record them. It was just sort of kind of getting it out of my system, and
Yeah.
at least it was a creative exercise because I was writing. So that's my advice.
My advice is to just, goddamn keep your nose clean, keep your head up, and make sure to wash your ass. And make sure to wash your ass. And make sure to wash your ass. And make sure to wash your ass.